Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, or depending on where you are, possibly morning. As you come into the room, we would invite you to use the chat box to introduce yourself. Make sure that in the blue drop-down menu, you have panelists and attendees so everyone can see who you are, where you're coming from. We'd love to see who's in the webinar today and who's joining us. Hello, Sherry from Chicago, Roxanne, North Carolina. I'm from Kentucky, Washington State, Maryland, Ohio, South Dakota, DC, Texas, Colorado. Thank you all for joining us. Another reminder, make sure your chats go to panelists and attendees. We have a very jam-packed agenda today, so I won't take too much of your time, but you are here today for a webinar spotlighting a new report, Catalyzing Family, School, and Community Partnerships, a review of the work of the Statewide Family Engagement Centers. So we will be spotlighting a few of the Statewide Family Engagement Centers and the amazing work that they are doing. So before we dive in, just a few housekeeping items. One, as I already mentioned, we'd love for you to use the chat, making sure that your chats go to panelists and attendees. You can share any resources you have there, any great takeaways you've gotten from the presentation. If you have questions, though, we ask that you put those in the Q&A rather than the chat. You should see that in your Zoom toolbar. That's where we'll keep track of questions. If we have time for questions at the end, we will pull them from there. So please put any questions in the Q&A rather than the chat. As you can see, the chat can move very quickly and it's harder to keep track of. And then the last thing I'll say before we get started, we will be recording this webinar and we will send out the recording and a PDF version of the slides to everyone who registers. So know that you'll have all the links and information after the fact. So now I'd like to turn it over to Sherry Wilson, NAFSCE's Director of Engagement and State Partnerships, who will go over our agenda for today.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you all of you for joining us today. We are absolutely thrilled to be able to share this report with you. So we thought it would be worthwhile to introduce you to some of the people who have done so much to contribute to this work. So today we're going to kick things off with just a little bit of information about what Statewide Family Engagement Centers, or SFECs, are from our Executive Director, Vito Borello, and Beth and Ambika, who are at the national level and have some oversight and have contributed greatly to the work of the SFECs. Then we'll have my colleague Raina, who is going to give you an overview of the report. And then she's going to dive into each of the sections of the report. And to illustrate those sections, we've asked one SFEC to participate and share what they're doing in that area. There are a lot of other SFECs out there that are doing amazing work as well. So you really do need to read the entire report. We'll share with you some of their additional resources and ways to contact them through our partnership with the National Centers for Families Learning. My friend Cindy is going to join us and share with you how you can access all of the SFECs through the national website they've just built. Then I'll share with you some of the resources we have at NAFSCE as well. Finally, if we have enough time left at the end, we'll have questions and answers. If not, we'll try and respond to the questions you put in the Q&A box and then send those out to you with a recording of this webinar. So that's it. So to get things started today, I'm going to turn things over to my dear friend and boss, Vito Borello.
Thank you so much, Sherry, and good afternoon, everyone. It is really a special pleasure for us at NAFSCE to be presenting today's webinar entitled Catalyzing Family, School, and Community Partnerships, a review of the work of the Statewide Family Engagement Centers. We are particularly pleased to highlight the progress, the responsiveness, and the importance of Statewide Family Engagement Centers. And I thought before we get into the presentation, I wanted to provide a little bit of historical perspective on the importance of Statewide Family Engagement Centers, or what we call SFECs, to NAFSCE. First of all, there's a real personal connection to these SFECs. SFECs are the evolution of PERCs, which was the acronym for Parental Information Resource Centers. And they were in place from 1995 to 2011. And they were in all 56 states and territories in our country, something that we really hope will be the evolution of Statewide Family Engagement Centers. These need to be in every state and be provided to every community. And you'll hear a bit about that later. In addition, though, 4 of our board members and staff are former either leaders of their organizations or directors of the organizations who oversaw PERCs in their states. So Susan Schaefer, also the chairwoman of NAFSCE, was the director of the Maryland PERC. Sally Wade, the TA for current TA for PERCs, was the director of the Florida PERC. Sherry Wilson was the director of the Alabama PERC, and I oversaw the organization that led the New York PERC for 12 years. And the unexpected defunding of PERCs in 2011 actually was the impetus for NAFSCE, because that was the time when there was a realization that there needed to be an association, a professional association whose sole focus was the advancement of family, school, and community engagement policy and practice. So it's a weird twist that, really because of the defunding of PERCs, that was the beginning of NAFSCE, which then was founded, as you know, in 2014. And then as we were thinking about SFECs, there was a small group of us who were asked to create by the U.S. Department of Education what was then being called PERC 2.0. And PERC 2.0, part of PERC 2.0 was the Statewide Family Engagement Centers. Many of you may not know that there were actually, there was a broader concept that there would be both Statewide Family Engagement Centers focused on statewide capacity building and technical assistance, and local family engagement centers that would be community-based direct services. That local part didn't happen, and those direct services were then integrated into this SFEC initiative. And then following that, NAFSCE provided guidance and recommendations to the U.S. Department of Education when they were thinking about the RFP for this. One of the things that we thought was really important based on our history with PERCs is that there was an absolute alignment between the SEAs and the SFECs within that state. And we were so happy to see that that ended up being part of the proposal. And I think it's one of the reasons why SFECs are really making an impact because of those relationships with their SEA. And then lastly, in terms of our background, in terms of providing TA and support to SFECs, and by the way, PERC is PIRC, which stands for Parental Information Resource Centers. That was the previous, if you will, prior to the SFECs. But in terms of our background around TA, we are providing TA to SFECs through supporting the department, Beth Ye and her team, around something that they call the working group, TWIG, our NCFL collaboration in establishing and supporting the SFEC PD network. And that's thanks to funding from the Carnegie Corporation. We'll be hearing from them in a minute. And then some subcontracts with SFEC specifically around systemic family engagement, something that we feel is so incredibly important to the advancement of this work. So now, without any further ado, what I'd like to do is to introduce 2 individuals who have had a major impact on why we're here today and the current success of SFECs. First, Beth Ye from the U.S. Department of Education. Beth is the team leader for the Statewide Family Engagement Centers and the DC Opportunity Scholarships programs in the Office of the Elementary and Secondary Education in the U.S. Department of Education, OESE. She has worked at the department for 20 years. She began a career in the planning and evaluation service at the Department of Ed, working on implementation evaluations for programs focused on literacy, homeless, migrant, and English language learners. She moved to grant administration in 2011 and has worked on innovative approaches to literacy, 21st century community learning centers, and programs for Hawaii and Alaska natives. Beth earned a bachelor's degree from Carnegie Mellon University and a master's degree from the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas. She is a mother of 2 children, ages 7 and 10, who are due home in a few minutes. Without further ado, Beth, thanks so much for being with us, and thanks for all you do for SFECs.
Thank you so much, Vito, for inviting me to speak today. You just naming all these different programs, and I'm gonna just tell you guys, but don't tell anyone, that this one's my favorite one. Thank you so much to NAFSCE for producing this excellent report that spreads the news about the great work of the SFEC grantees. I've used the information in the report already in a couple meetings already today, so it's coming in handy a lot for me to be able to spread the news of the great work that my grantees are doing. The Department of Education believes that family and community engagement is key to student achievement and social emotional health. And COVID has only highlighted the crucial role that families and communities hold in the education process. Particularly as school districts have counted on family members and community organizations to facilitate online learning. I think one of my jobs is going to be to continue to raise this as we go back to quote unquote normal operations, not to leave family members and communities behind while we're doing that. Family engagement is woven through many of the department's programs. But this is the only program that is focused specifically on family engagement. It's giving the Department of Education a chance to provide funds to centers in 13 states to promote family engagement, focused on, as Vito was saying, 2 different objectives: the statewide technical assistance and the family engagement interventions that are in specific school districts within those states. Ed is thrilled that NAFSCE has provided this report that highlights the work of these SFEC grantees. And we're also thrilled that all of you are joining us today to learn more about the report and the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beth. And let me just say, Beth, you are such a pleasure to work with. I know that the SFECs feel really grateful to have a program officer who advocates for them and supports them. And just want to thank you on behalf of NAFSCE for the work that you do. Next, I'd like to introduce Ambika Kapoor from the Carnegie Corporation of New York. She has become a wonderful friend and colleague to NAFSCE and to me. Carnegie, I would say, got involved in really prioritizing family engagement a few years ago. So it seems like it was only a few years ago. And to give you a sense of their commitment, many of you have participated in our Reframing Institutes, our Reframing the Conversation Initiative, and the research. Well, it was Carnegie who funded us to be able to advance that. They funded us to be able to establish the National Alliance of Family Engagement, those 23 national organizations that we are now evolving into a policy coalition. And they currently are funding us around our pre-service consortium for educator preparation. Many of you know there are 7 state teams that comprise SEAs and Institutes for Higher Education that are working with us to develop a framework to prepare teachers to engage families before they enter the classroom. And Carnegie is supporting that as well. So all to say, we're so thankful to have them. And they are also supporting the PD network that includes NCFL and NAFSCE in supporting all of the SFECs. And that included partial funding to support the development of this report. So with all that, I'd like to introduce Ambika. Ambika is the program officer within the corporation's education program, where she manages the public understanding portfolio. Ambika oversees grant making aimed at engaging parents, communities, teachers, and policymakers in understanding and demanding changes in education that ensure that all students develop the knowledge, skills, and dispositions they need for future success. Previously at CCNY, Ambika served as Officer of Special Projects in their national program. She managed grant making and communications activities for their next generation science standards development and mobilization. And she managed their dissemination program, a catalytic fund to amplify and reinforce major corporation-wide program and institutional goals. Kapoor was born in Calcutta. She has a BA in International Relations from Wellesley College and a master's degree in International Education Development from Columbia University. It is my great pleasure to introduce Ambika Kapoor.
Thank you so much, Vito. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. I am delighted to join this webinar. In fact, when you talked about Carnegie being new to family engagement, yes, we are actually new. We have been doing this, supporting this work and learning along with you, actually, Vito, NAFSCE, and our other partners at NCFL. And today I'm actually, more than telling you about sort of our interest and our strategy, I'm excited to learn more about the statewide family engagement centers and what, this report has been really valuable for, other funders too, to think and to learn about how family engagement is being practiced in across the country. So just a little bit about Carnegie. We believe in the power of family engagement, as a grant-making strategy. In the education program, as Vito said, we seek to bring together families, communities, students, educators, policymakers even, and I would even add the general public in support of an equitable and high-quality education system. We believe that all these perspectives at the table have to be there if we are to create and advocate for the kinds of student-centered learning experiences that will allow all students to master not just academic content, but gain future-ready knowledge, skills, and dispositions, and also succeed in post-secondary learning and careers. We believe that investing in parents and families is an essential part of that process. Our grant-making strategy is around when we believe that when families are empowered as true partners in their children's education, students thrive, schools are strong, and the whole community benefits. That's why we fund programs that bridge the gap between home and school. We want families to have access to the information they need to support their children's learning and for them to be able to act as effective advocates for change. As Beth talked about over a year ago, when schools across the country shut down indefinitely, and I would say embarked on the largest ever experiment in distance learning, it's sort of what we've seen over the past year. Despite everybody's best efforts, the results are sort of mixed. And you've been hearing a lot about all the learning loss and what this is going to mean for our kids. But I think that one positive, or I would say we'd be doing ourselves a disservice by only focusing on the negative, especially since, at least like I said, there's one positive to come out of this pandemic learning. We've, I think, finally broken the imaginary boundary that exists between home and school. When school shut down, in March last year, parents suddenly had a front row seat to their children's learning. Parents there was a dramatic and rapid shift, as we know, as families saw that they could not, people are paying more attention to family engagement in schools. And we have seen that school districts and this conversation we're having across the country, people are paying more importance to family engagement. This is not a new concept, but something that I'm glad that people are paying more attention. We all know all the research that shows when parent involvement at home has more than twice the impact on student test scores than parents' education level or socioeconomic data. I would even add that in this time of when we talk about equity in education, I think family engagement is also a critical factor for equity in education. We can't afford to overlook that. So that's why I just wanted to sort of say that we partnered with NAFSCE and the National Center for Families Learning to support the network of family engagement centers that can actually provide this technical assistance to local efforts and communities to train families and educators on how family engagement practices can be sustained. Given all that interest, we just want this to sort of be a sustainable part of how systems change happens and how school is done differently. So I will maybe just stop here and say another big thank you to NAFSCE for the important work you're doing to prioritize family engagement, and thank you for having me join you.
And Mbika, thank you. Thank you for being such an advocate for family, school, and community engagement. It's been so exciting to work on the projects that the Carnegie Corporation has considered funding, and we look forward to continued work together. With that, I'd like to introduce NAFSCE's Director of Research, Senior Director of Research and Policy, Reina Hernandez. Reina is the lead author on this report and did a wonderful job. In fact, I'd like to just thank our entire NAFSCE team and NCFL and all of the SFECs who cooperated and worked with us so that we could have this report today. It would not be here if it weren't for all of you. So with that, Reina.
Thank you, Vito. As Vito mentioned, we have a long history that even predates SFECs with this work, and NAFSCE really wanted to be able to tell the story and help to share the work that the SFECs are doing, both with the field, with all of you, to ensure that these resources that are really terrific are accessible and available to everyone, even outside of the states where SFECs are working and where they've developed them, recognizing, that it's not always, you may not always be looking for resources in a state that that's outside of your own, but much of what they've done really could support people everywhere. In addition, we really wanted to inform policymakers about this work, because we think that this work is critical to supporting student success, that it should continue and it should expand. Every state should have a statewide family engagement center, and we hope to move in that direction. But really, a first step is just telling the story and learning more about what they do. This report provides an overview of statewide family engagement centers, walks through the types of programs and services they offer to diverse audiences, and provides highlights of their work, including a 2-page profile of each one at the end of the report. We are thankful for all of the support for this work, particularly from the Carnegie Corporation of New York and the Heising Simons Foundation, and appreciate all the information that was provided by the statewide family engagement centers that really made this report possible. So one of the reasons why this report was essential was because there is a capacity gap in our field. Statewide family engagement centers are one strategy to help address a capacity gap that has long existed. Research demonstrates that family and community engagement is a critical strategy for advancing student development, academic achievement, school improvement. Respecting, valuing, and partnering with families is also at the heart of addressing equity within education. While this has always been true, I think more recently, the COVID-19 pandemic has really shone a light on how important it is for teachers, principals, parents and other family members, community organizations, and other partners to be connected with each other and to work together to meet the ever-changing needs of children and youth. Despite how important this work is and how important those connections are, educators have consistently reported feeling unprepared for engaging families. Even as recently as in the course of the pandemic, NAFSCE surveyed educators and found that there continues to be this lack of preparedness that will position our practitioners to be successful. And so in recognition of that, SFECs were established. This is just one more strategy to support schools, districts, and state education agencies to implement and enhance their family engagement policies, programs, and activities. As Vito mentioned earlier, one of the shifts between PERCs and statewide family engagement centers is that they really go beyond just providing direct services to really trying to change systems and support those big picture changes that create the conditions for effective family and community engagement. So the US Department of Education, as you heard earlier from Beth, currently funds 12 statewide family engagement centers serving 13 states: Arizona, Connecticut, Hawaii, Kentucky, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Nebraska, Ohio, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, South Dakota, and West Virginia. SFECs serve schools and district staff, Alice, that are directly providing services to families, family-facing professionals. They also serve state education agencies and people who are in those oversight positions that are perhaps overseeing Title I programs or 21st century programs, programs targeting services to English language learners, early childhood, special education. We know that family and community engagement touches each of these areas. And what we found from the data as we were developing this report is that statewide family engagement centers are serving all of those populations, from teachers to community partners to serving families and parents directly. They offer virtual trainings and webinars. And before the pandemic, we're offering in-person professional development opportunities, training. Most of them offer conferences and other more extensive professional development programs, including cohorts and learning communities and modules. Go on. Statewide family engagement centers have also developed a lot of resources, and a lot of that is available to you. If you're interested, there will be an opportunity to find links to some of those resources, both in the report and on the website. They've developed tip sheets, informational resources for families. Many of them have created videos that are easily accessible for different audiences, including families. They've created newsletters to share information. Their websites centralize information about family, school, and community engagement for their state. Some of them even offer things like learning packets and books to families, or Wi-Fi hotspots, particularly to support distance learning throughout the course of the pandemic. So the services really range, but they all have those resources that reach families directly. Their work also spans across the grade continuum. Many of their resources, while they're available to all families, focus on serving elementary and middle school families. But that said, many of the SFECs also reach into early childhood, secondary education, and some of them even offer post-secondary services and information to families and to schools. The report includes individual profiles for each statewide family engagement center. Each profile page includes some highlights of their work, web resources that anyone can access, and links to their webpage and social media, where you can learn more about their specific work. So in this next section, we'll actually go more in depth on 5 of the focus areas that we included in the report. For each section, you'll hear from one of the statewide family engagement centers. The highlight that they'll share really does just represent one example of the extensive work in each of these focus areas that is taking place at all of the SFECs. An hour and a half is hardly enough time to do justice to the work and resources of statewide family engagement centers, but should provide you with an idea of what types of resources are available. If you're interested in learning more, please download and share the report, visit our resource web pages, and visit the SFEC websites directly. We hope the report will serve as a resource to you and that you will advocate for their continuation and expansion in every state. So the first area is strengthening families as educational partners. Whether working directly with families or whether it's by providing training to teachers and practitioners that work directly with families, much of their work is focused on how they can support each of these areas. This includes helping families support their children in different ways, including around literacy, STEM, social emotional development. You can go on to the next slide. There's programming to help build parent leadership. Many of the statewide family engagement centers offer parent leadership programming. There are different supports and services to support family well-being, including direct services like food access, addressing housing insecurity, helping families access technology, and particularly over the course of the pandemic, access high-speed internet, and also connecting families to each other so that they can learn and build peer-to-peer connections. With that, I'd like to introduce Laura from the Kentucky Collaborative for Families and Schools, who will give an example of their family leadership work.
Thank you, Raina, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Beard. I'm the Family Engagement Coordinator for the Pritchard Committee, and I'm going to talk to you today about our Commonwealth Institute for Parent Leadership. You can advance the slide, please. So the Commonwealth Institute for Parent Leadership, also known in our state as SIPL, has been in existence for more than 20 years, and families have really engaged in deeper learning around Kentucky's public education system. And our Commonwealth Institute for Parent Leadership serves as kind of an umbrella of a host of different engagement strategies and leadership development for not only families, but schools and communities, because we know that that will increase academic success for our students. We really believe that these powerful partnerships are achieved when we gather folks together who become active champions for education. And we feel that that's a core strategy for improving student academic achievement. You can advance the slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about two pieces of our Commonwealth Institute for Parent Leadership. And one is kind of an onboarding for parents in our designated SFEC regions. And we have what's called the Parent Leadership Base Camp. And so this is an event that's really set up to be specific to the region or the school. And we have a model for Base Camp that really involves having a keynote speaker to kind of set the tone for the time together, to really put the charge out there for why it's so critical for parents to engage in public education. And then we like to have sessions devoted to topics, interest areas, whether it be special education or learning more about the school report card. And this really allows parents to hear from the folks firsthand. Maybe it's the superintendent, maybe it's the principal, maybe it's someone from the Department of Education. And so the Base Camp model really provides them that one-on-one time to ask questions and learn more about what's going on in their local district. And we have our partners listed there on our SFEC grant who help make these base camps happen across our state. You can advance to the next slide. The next part of our institute I'd like to highlight is the SIPL Fellowship. The fellowship takes place October through April. We start taking applications in July and August, and then kind of review those during the months of September. We announced the class in October, and they jump right in. They begin with topics that you'll see here. SIPL had already moved to a webinar-based platform, and so it was really pretty easy for us to continue with the fellowship even during the pandemic. But they get an orientation to what it means to be a part of the fellowship. We give a history of Kentucky education reform. We talk about social emotional learning. We move into early childhood, and that usually happens around January. This year, we have brought in our state partners around what leadership positions in Kentucky schools look like, how to run for a school board, our school-based decision-making teams, Kentucky PTA, et cetera. We brought in our Project Aware group in Kentucky to talk about school climate and culture. And we talk about how to look at your school report card, what assessments that you'll see in Kentucky Public Education, and then equity in education to round us out. We host an annual summit, and it was just a really nice addition this year to bring on English language learners for a new class. So that class is actually not finished just yet. We started it in January. So it's new. There's a picture there of a recent event that we had where these parents have really been addressing some barriers to family engagement in their schools. And we've talked about those at our different times together. And we're meeting in person with them because that's something they really need from us. And we were able to connect with our Kentucky Department of Education and get our commissioner to visit with the families, hear their barriers firsthand. And I can tell you that we're taking some next steps to address some of those barriers. Also new this year, we're starting some family room conversations. They kind of came out of some lunch and learn activities that we've done, and also some parent cafes that we've hosted. We're kind of adapting to our families' needs during this time. And so we've done a lot of things over the course of this past year that are either evolving or we're changing up to fit schedules. So it's been really nice to be able to keep up with the flow on what families need. And the last thing I kind of want to highlight here, I'm super proud of this, is that our graduates of the fellowship, we had a goal for them to take on a leadership role, something they've not currently been doing when they were in the fellowship, but once they graduate, they're either going to run for school board or run for office or join PTA, and 100% of our graduates did take on a leadership role this year. So with that, I think the next slide is my contact information and also where you can find more information about SFEC.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We really appreciate hearing about all of that. So the next area that the report addresses is about advancing equity. All SFECs have programming that addresses culturally responsive practice. It's a priority within the program and for each one of the centers. Many of them have also developed resources that meet the needs of specific families, from families of English language learners to families of students with special needs, families living in rural communities, grandparents raising children, as well as others. And those resources can really be helpful at providing a more tailored approach to meeting the needs of families. Advancing equity is really critical in supporting families and is also a strategy for trying to address equity and close achievement gaps for student outcomes. So to talk a little bit more about this really important work, I'd like to introduce Mariela Puentes from the Collaborative Action for Family Engagement, CAFE, SFEC, which serves the states of Maryland and Pennsylvania. Mariela?
Thank you, Reina. So today I'll be sharing about one of the initiatives of our Statewide Family Engagement Center. As Reina mentioned, we're the Statewide Family Engagement Center for Maryland and Pennsylvania. And so this initiative is the Maryland Community Schools Workshop Series. We hosted this series for over 200 community schools across Maryland. The focus was on building community school coordinators' understanding of cultural responsiveness, equity, when working with families and communities. This was a collaboration between CAFE, our SFEC, and MSDE's Director of Community Schools. And so one of our goals with this initiative was to nurture a community of educators who work together to support and strengthen their shared commitment to building family engagement systems where all children have access and opportunities to learn and achieve at high levels. So next slide, please. So a little bit about what participants found most helpful or most useful in this series. Here's some of the feedback we received from participants. So someone said that it was helpful for them to reframe what they think of family engagement and the equity of opportunities that they have, strategies on how to be culturally responsive in their work with families. They enjoyed learning about what other counties were doing to address attendance and how they were supporting families during this virtual time. And then they also appreciated getting information about dream hoarding and then different policies that advance community school efforts. Next slide. So our purpose was really to strengthen community school coordinators' efforts to build equitable collaborations between families, schools, and communities, and to really unpack what that meant in their specific context. And so at MAEC, one thing we do when we have technical assistance is that we don't just like to talk about theories and practices in isolation, but we intentionally build in a lot of reflection components so that participants can think about how these impact, the impact that these have on children and families, and how they can enable families to authentically engage. So through this series, participants reflected on their own identities, their values, their beliefs, biases, and how these impacted their partnerships with families. And so we specifically advanced equity, right, by building educators' capacity to reflect on how policies and practices can be used to ensure equitable engagement for all families. We intentionally encouraged participants to seek out families' priorities, their concerns, their feedback, and to intentionally make sure that they were seeking out family voices that were representative of the overall school community. And this is by race, by class, gender, language, disability status, and other lines of difference, so that they were really truly hearing from all families. And then we also asked that they examine the role of race, of culture, class, and power, and how that shapes relationships between families, schools, and communities. Because we know that a lot of the time, right, these typical power dynamics that we see within school systems often are influenced by these lines of difference. And so it was our goal to build capacity of educators to shift some of those power dynamics and really have families play a central role in defining engagement for themselves. And then lastly, right, we wanted to make sure that educators had the capacity to leverage existing resources within families, within communities, leverage their strengths, their expertise, their resources, and really take this asset-based approach to address inequities. And then in terms of what's next and what's to come after this initiative, we'll be deepening our work with community school coordinators who participated in this workshop series. And we're going to be launching a community of practice for community school coordinators this fall, where they can continue to learn from one another, share best practices, and continue to work and unpack what it means to build equitable collaborations with families and communities. And then lastly, we're going to be providing workshops for how to build capacity of other staff within community schools by hosting additional workshops, so that this responsibility doesn't just fall on this one person, right, who's to champion this work, but that it really is a team and collaborative approach within each of the community schools to reimagine what family engagement systems can look like. And then I think that is it for my piece. I'll drop my contact information into the chat box in case you're interested in connecting. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mariela. So the next section is about building practitioner capacity to address the gap that I mentioned earlier. SFECs use different modes to develop resources for training practitioners. Many of them offer conferences and webinars. Some have developed more extensive training modules that are available online, or in-person training institutes that are available statewide. Some of them have gone on to partner with institutes of higher education within their state to better prepare practitioners, or to establish in-service training opportunities that really meet their needs. I'd like to introduce Megan Cochran from the Adventure Group, which leads the West Virginia SFEC, to speak a bit about how they're building educator capacity. Megan?
Actually, I am going to do the presentation. I'm LaDotta Taylor, and Megan and I decided that I would take this on today. It's a pleasure to be here. So lots of things for us to share, and we'll go on to the next slide. our mission is in West Virginia. We really are working to help families participate in their child's learning, both inside and outside of the school. And we do this work through the Adventure Group. On the next slide, we are a nonprofit that provides customized training to schools in West Virginia, and we've worked very closely with the West Virginia Department of Education for years. So specifically, what I would like to talk about on the next slide is a program that has evolved from a series of webinars that we did last year during the pandemic. As all of us were in this situation, we were not able to meet with families and meet with schools in person. So we created a series of webinars for families to assist them as they were dealing with this change with the pandemic, and to provide them just some good skills and information that we thought would be very helpful to them as they were trying to help their children learn. We realized from working through that particular program that there were a lot of needs with our families. There were a lot of challenges around technology. And as we looked at all of these issues and opportunities and concerns, we realized that we needed to go back and start with leaders within our schools. We have 100 schools that have been identified for our project, and we realized that we really needed to help those leaders invest in family engagement, because the leaders just weren't sure and still aren't sure what to do. We've done a similar program with the West Virginia Department of Education called Elevated Leadership Development, where we work with the staff at the Department of Ed to build leadership skills. I think leadership skills are something that we continuously need to develop and expand. And so we've worked with the department at that level, and now we are beginning to take what we learned from our webinars, what we've learned from that work at the Department of Education, and build a program for leaders in schools so that they can help expand the family engagement process within their buildings. We were thrilled at the number of schools that applied to be a part of this. And as a former high school math teacher, I think that high schools sometimes have one of the greatest challenges when it comes to engaging families. And we had more high schools apply to be a part of this leadership development than middle or elementary schools in our state. So we're focusing on three major areas, and we worked closely with the Department of Education in West Virginia to identify these, because we wanted to make sure we pulled in some of the emphasis on learning recovery, but we also focused on leadership skills that are desperately needed, as well as family engagement. So you can see on the screen, we're looking at helping to develop skills to lead in challenging times, because we know this pandemic is probably not the last challenging time that we will have. We want to empower families and teachers to help with this learning recovery. But then most important, we want to cultivate family engagement. So we have a process in place. We are working with teams from the schools that have been accepted, a principal, an assistant principal, and a teacher, leader, social worker, counselor. We meet monthly, and we do sessions where we look at each of these areas focused on leadership skills, family engagement. And then we have a second meeting every month where the schools network and connect with other schools with similar situations. And then we plan to continue to share resources and have great conversations. On the next slide is a brief outline of what we are planning to teach. And I realize that that font may be a little small, but just briefly, we're going to look at their leadership signature. We want to focus on the individuals to get started, build a leadership brand for them. Help them to think about how they can build dynamic teams to emphasize, family engagement. And we're also going to look at leadership models that are, very evident and growing in the 21st century. We're then going to look at some program management skills, help build some confident communities through some collaborative culture conversations, and thinking about how we can enhance emotional intelligence and communication skills. We'll then move to some intercultural competencies, inquiry for growth, some agile leadership, change for a resilient culture, because we know all of this really stems around change. Do a session on social emotional well-being, and then empowering others. And the final session will be really about cultivating a 21st century leadership plan around family engagement. So we are very excited to work with this project. We think it's a perfect building block from the webinar series for our parents to now really help build those leadership skills within our schools to help emphasize leadership, learning recovery, and family engagement. On the next slide, you'll see our contact information, and I'll put my email address in the chat box as well as Megan's, and we would look forward to any opportunity to discuss and continue this conversation with others. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's terrific to hear about all of this amazing work and the fact that it's continuing to evolve and to grow. The next area that we wanted to talk about is the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that this pandemic has impacted every student, every family, every community across the country, but the impact was felt in different ways and was handled in different ways. With school buildings shut down for so many months, partnerships between families and schools became even more essential for reaching and meeting the needs of students. Furthermore, the health and economic impact that the pandemic had led to the need for reassessing and reprioritizing the needs and services that SFECs were providing and that were needed in different communities across their states. One of the major steps that SFECs took was to begin by just reassessing need, not making assumptions, really engaging families in dialogue and communication. You see in the assessment work that took place, it really continued or increased in statewide family engagement centers, from surveying to engaging in focus groups and really trying to get feedback about the changing conditions and circumstances that were facing families. The second thing that we saw, and this was very significant, is an increase in partnerships. Now, if you take a look at the report, you'll be able to look at this in more detail, but all SFECs engage in partnerships with schools, with local community partners, some with libraries, museums, and other cultural institutions. But what we saw, and you see this in orange, is that many SFECs formed new partnerships based on the new needs that they identified, in addition to those that already existed before the pandemic began. I'd like to introduce Lisa Marie Ng from the Hawaii Statewide Family Engagement Center, who will speak a bit to how they responded to the pandemic and the types of resources they developed to support families. Lisa Marie?
Thank you, Raina. So aloha, everyone. Today, I'll be sharing a few amazing resources that our Hawaii SFEC created in the last year. The Parenting During a Pandemic is a free webinar series that we started last summer that connects families with local experts on topics requested by families. Topics included motivating children to learn during the pandemic, recognizing signs of depression in children and teens, smart strategies centering your child in the IEP process, and more. All sessions are recorded, archived, and include a slide deck with resources. And the latest session was earlier this month on how to have math conversations to build math skills for grades PK through 12. We welcome you to view the recordings on the website. Next slide, please. So how did it all start? Well, last year, at the start of the pandemic, parent community networking centers in the Kailua Kalaheo complex saw a need to virtually support common family needs. They collected over 200 parent responses using a Google form, then reached out to our center for technical assistance. We identified and arranged pre-meetings with local professionals to present and answer parent questions. And that's how the Parenting During a Pandemic webinar series came to be. Together, we created, and through progressive elaboration improved our communication and schedule processes with our speakers. Here's a look at our timeline of webinar logistics for pre and post webinar communication with our speakers. We started off with a pre-meeting to share the purpose of why we're reaching out to them and the needs assessments results. Together, we determined what learning outcomes could best benefit our parents. We sent out pre-emails to confirm the webinar details and also to double check to make sure that we could record their sessions. We also co-constructed a feedback survey together. We had tech meetings. You know, back then, Zoom was having so many updates. We had to try to keep track of what was, how to use Zoom. So we did assist our presenters with that. We also sent post emails thanking them for all of their support and to ask for their shared slides and resources if they didn't send it to us ahead of time. And last but not least, we did share the feedback results with them. We knew our process could be sustainable and replicated in other schools in complex areas. So we created tools in Google Drive to save others time and create a collaborative space where they can do what they document and document what they do. So here's a sneak peek into how we organized our drive. We had a folder for a needs survey, webinar setup, presentation slides and resources, and finally, we had a Google site. Next slide, please. So view and download the toolkit today. You'll have access to everything, our webinar setup checklist, templates for emails, surveys, presenter tracker, etc., and a ready to go Google Drive folder that you can just copy for yourself and take it from there. Next slide, please. In response to the emerging COVID-19 pandemic, our center developed 2 welcome back packages, one for families and one for educators. The packages were distributed before the school reopened in fall of school year 2020-2021. They're based on Dr. Karen Mapp's book, Beyond the Bake Sale. Each includes five key strategies and tips for effective communications between school and home and promoted equitable practices to include support for special education students. All resources were submitted for review and approval by our center's Parent Majority Advisory Committee. We're currently in the process of translating them into 6 languages by the start of the upcoming fall semester: Hawaiian, Marshallese, Chuukese, Tagalog, Ilocano, and Spanish. Next slide, please. The packages were made available for wide dissemination and download through our HFEC website and social media, as well as shared via email and/or chat links with educators, Hawaii DOE staff and administrators, parent community network centers, and families during online training, presentations, and webinars. Because our SFECs support and share resources together, we are happy to see other SFECs adopt our welcome back packages for their states, incorporate it into a certificate program, and feature them on their websites. Mahalo for your time.
Thank you so much, Lisa Marie. We appreciate that, and those guides were so helpful as you all developed them very early on in the process, which really began to trigger looking to you for some of these other resources, which were great. So the final area that we'll talk about is supporting systemic change in states. This is a very important area for NAFSCE in particular, because there's so much opportunity to really begin to lay the foundations for strengthening the expectation that family and community engagement be common practice, and that it really be more well understood, and that the conditions that support effective family and community engagement be strengthened across the country. But in order to do this, SFECs have often participated in advisory committees, commissions, or met with their state departments of education to talk about new changes that are happening, particularly throughout the pandemic, as there's been a need to reach families. Some of them have co-developed resources with their state education agencies, or hosted focus groups with families or with their advisory councils. Every statewide family engagement center has an advisory council that is made up of a majority of families from the state that is able to respond quickly, to provide information and reflection on things that are being proposed, problems and solutions. There's also been work on just identifying need, conducting research, providing data that's helpful to to the work of state education agencies. So I'd like to introduce Meredith Wellman and Tom Capretta from the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center at The Ohio State University to speak a little bit to the work that they've done in this area. Meredith and Tom.
Thank you for that introduction, Raina. My name's Thomas Capretta, and I'm here today with my colleague, Dr. Meredith Wellman. We both work at the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center, which is within the College of Education at The Ohio State University. We're just going to touch briefly on how our center is supporting systemic change in Ohio for family, school, and community partnerships that launch students to success. The Ohio State University and the Ohio Department of Education have had a partnership around the advancement of effective family and community engagement before the statewide family engagement centers were funded in this current authorization. So we've continued and formalized and even expanded this partnership as the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center. So one thing that we do with our department partners is that we regularly meet with multiple offices that hold projects that we work and consult on or partnership with. So we meeting with multiple offices at OD on a regular basis. We also have taken a role in supporting Ohio's Whole Child Framework. Ohio's Whole Child Framework places the child at the center with districts, schools, families, and community partners and to comprehensively meet those child's needs. We've been contributing this framework since the beginning of the project and have continued to serve as a member on the Whole Child Advisory Group, as well as an implementation team trying to create tools and resources to put this plan to action. So we also support policy development at the state level and provide technical assistance to the department around that. Ohio has a state board adopted model policy on family engagement that they would like to have updated and brought up to date. So we've contributed to research, or we've contributed to analyzing research in relevant and current literature around this topic and combined what we learned there with the department's expertise on government affairs and things going on in other states to put together what we hope to be able to present to the State Board of Education in November after consulting with practitioners and other stakeholders in the field. So we're really excited to do that. We also are housed in a translational research center at The Ohio State University, which basically means that we distill the great research going on across the country and the globe into actionable items for practitioners. So we take really seriously our role in the research to practice pipeline. And to do that, we leverage our benefit of being at a huge university like Ohio State to collaborate with different faculty members with us on their research. So we help them connect directly with schools, districts, and families and implement these research projects. One example is our Middle Ground project with Dr. Eric Anderman and Brett Zaromsky. We also support professional networks, multiple ones. Our Family Engagement Leaders of Ohio network is a great network focused on practitioners at the district level. The intended audience is that district level, but we welcome anyone that wants to learn more and advance their practice around family engagement. We currently have members from Florida, Washington, D.C., Virginia, and beyond. So don't feel like you being out of the state can keep you from that. So, and I'll see if Meredith here wants to say just a quick word about our website.
Absolutely. And you can go to the next slide. So one of the best ways that we build awareness and capacity for family, school, and community partnerships in Ohio is through our website. And it's here where you'll see many examples of the research to practice pipeline in action. And we want people to see how to bring research to life in their classrooms and at their kitchen tables. We launched our website in July of 2019, so it's been up for almost 2 years, which is hard to believe. On our website, we have over 200 resources for families and schools supporting strong family, school, and community partnerships. And the resources cover a number of different topics, including academics, family mealtime, child well-being, and planning and measurement tools for schools, recommended reading materials, and more. It's really nice to see that our website is accessed by individuals from over 450 Ohio towns and cities. So we really feel like we are providing the supports that we are designed to do. And we've had visitors from all 50 states and over 115 countries around the world. About 2,000 people or more visit our site each month. And we really like to see to showcase the breadth of resources out there for partnerships and engagement. So we try and add many new resources each month. We also recognize that part of our work includes awareness building. So we want to make sure that schools have lots of free access to recordings of our staff and others talking about how to meaningfully engage families. So we have 14 videos available on our website in the professional learning tab for education professionals to build their understanding of family engagement. And we encourage you to subscribe to our news and guidance emails, which come out once a month. And those can be found in the About Us drop-down menu on our site. You can also learn more about our professional networks on our website. And with that, thank you so much for tuning in to hear about our work. If you have any questions or want to continue to discuss any of the things we just talked about, we're going to put our email addresses in the chat box. And thanks to NAFSCE for this opportunity to share about our work in Ohio.
So I will introduce my dear friend, Cindy Beaumart. Cindy and I work together on the SFEC PD network. She and I have had a fantastic time learning about all of the work that the SFECs do. And Cindy sets up the monthly meetings every month and has gone way past what we originally started with. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Sherry. Thanks for such a lovely introduction, and it is truly a joy to work with you, Sherry, and all the NAFSCE staff. So thank you so much for inviting me today to share a little bit about NCFL and the SFEC network. Okay, next. The National Center for Families Learning is a 32-year-old organization, so there's lots of history all the way around here today, engaged in holistic approaches to educational solutions that create stronger impact and greater success for families. Next. The foundational work of NCFL is our family literacy model programming. Through the leadership of our founder and executive director, Sharon Darling, this model programming is the underpinning of federal legislation for adult and family literacy. Our work also includes a cadre of professional development to support professionals and practitioners of family learning, as well as to support families themselves through family leadership, training, and resources. We have really pivoted in the last 4 years to lift up family voices as equal partners with a focus on language justice, racial justice, and co-development principles. We want their voices to be the important voices at the table in the development of family engagement practices. And as we've learned through our journey together through COVID times, supporting the educational needs of families and students does not only lay on the doorsteps of our educational institutions and schools, but the success of our children and their families are directly tied to the success of our communities and their ability to work collectively to build comprehensive solutions. So our community development work at NCFL is focused on just this. And we have been doing this for about 4 years now. And COVID has only provided more justification for this work, and we continue to embrace it strongly. Next. Oh, one quick thing. There was 2 more notes. We have some wonderful digital properties of wonderopolis.org. Thank you. Sorry about that. And the National Literacy Directory, which is available with resources that you all submit to us so that we can let everybody know that they exist. So please check out those digital assets. Okay, thanks. So our NCFL footprint is large. We're in 150 communities around 39 states, plus Washington, DC, serving over 4.5 million parents and children. So next, when the statewide family engagement grants were awarded, and we had received the grants for Arizona and Nebraska, as well as being contractors for Kentucky and Maryland, for Maryland and Pennsylvania, we saw a need for all of us to come together to be able to communicate and collaborate and continue this work together. Next. So through the wonderful funding from Carnegie Corporation, thank you, Ambika, we did just that. So Sherry and I host monthly meetings of all these wonderful SFECs that some of which that you've heard of today, and the rest of them are equally as fabulous and have amazing resources. So the mission of the network is to advance the entire field. So this information is available to everyone. So even those of you on the call on this webinar today that do not have funded SFECs, everyone is genuinely sharing their information. So please take advantage and look at it. Okay, next. Naturally, we contracted with NAFSCE to help us provide the information to the SFECs through their Member Connect online community and to produce reports just as we're talking about today. Next. These are just a list of some of the topics that we've addressed through our professional development. We rapidly shifted with COVID to try to understand how to better reach our families. And then, of course, through the horrific murders that happened in the last year, including Breonna Taylor in my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, we looked and George Floyd, we looked inward on our own organizations to examine what systemic racism and racial injustices were happening in our own, addressing our own biases within our organization. So this professional development network has realized a much larger mission and capacity than what we initially started out with. Next. We were able to attend in person in a convening at the NCFL National Network in Louisville in 2019. However, with COVID, we had to cancel that in 2020. So we shifted the funding and pivoted toward developing this website that supports all the SFECs and to provide information nationally to anyone else who wants to access it, as well as to help inform policymakers and funders around the innovative practices that are happening with our work. We're super excited to launch this this month. We are rapidly populating it with information. So if you know of something that should be here, please visit the website and contact us, and you have the ability to upload and share information as well. Next. So when you look at the website, there's a easy access about tab to get to all the SFECs. There's a tab that talks about our impact and the research, which is where you will find the report that we're talking about today. We want to share some of the wonderful best practices that each of the SFECs are doing that, again, you've heard multiple examples today, and everyone, again, is so generous to share what they are doing. And then resources and policies. Next. You'll also find webinars that we produced that are amazing and full of innovative practices. Next. And we hope to see you at our next national conference in Dallas. Please register now, and you will be able to hear several of the SFECs present about the work that they're doing. and get to know us and meet us in person. And we're super excited to do that.
I'll be there too, Cindy. I'm
Yeah.
excited too.
So one quick last thing I'll put in the chat. We're only able to do this because of funding, and that funding that typically hasn't been there before. Well, there's also a great opportunity for additional funding. And we're hosting a Family Day of Action. Please join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Always lovely to see you and work together. So I'm really glad you could join us today. So I want to share with you just a few of the resources that we have. NAFSCE has created and populated several pages on our website with information and resources on the SFECs that we invite you to visit and take full advantage of. First, we have our SFEC overview page. It lists each SFEC, it links to their website, and also links to their 2-page state profile that we pulled from the report. We also have a page that links to the downloadable report, which, as you've heard through this presentation, has a lot of information and resources about SFECs in general and each individual center. And then finally, we've created an SFEC resource page, which has a list of each SFEC. And when you click on each center, a table expands below, linking to individual resources and descriptions from each SFEC across each of the focus areas from the report. We hope to add to the resource page as the SFECs continue to expand their programming and their resources. Now, I am going to ask all of our presenters to turn their cameras back on and come on screen. And we have a little bit of time left for some Q&As. And Alice, if you want to take the slides down, I don't think we need those right now. If everybody wants to come back on screen, we can see all your beautiful faces and Hawaii. And we will take a few questions. So I see a lot of you have written questions in the Q&A box. That's where we're pulling them from. So if you still have questions, make sure you put them in there and we will respond to them as we have time available. Okay, so I believe this one actually came in during your presentation, Mariella. Somebody asked, who leads the community of practice sessions at the schools?
So that is an initiative that will be starting in the fall. And so it's an extension of the workshop series with Maryland Community Schools. And so CAFE staff will be hosting that with schools virtually and also ideally a combination of in-person meetings.
Wonderful, thank you. And there was the same question for the West Virginia SFEC. So who hosts the learning sessions that you guys are doing? Dr. Taylor?
In West Virginia, we are doing most of those virtual, but the ones that are in person will be sponsored and hosted by our organization. We'll be bringing everyone in and doing some of them in person, but we're going to continue to do some things virtually as well.
Awesome. Okay, here's a question from Garrick. He wants to know, how have SFECs advocated for equitable access to out-of-school activities? So any of our SFEC directors want to talk about how you've advocated for equitable access?
Oh, I can speak a little to that. So our center partnered with the Hawaii After School Alliance, and we provided some technical assistance to them and a little bit about equity. And what they did is they asked us to facilitate a discussion on their national conference for out-of-school networks. And so we did. We actually ended up co-presenting with other states to talk about advocacy. And another state also shared their personal experience with accessibility in out-of-state programs. And she went through a scenario on, okay, this is what happened. What do you think? And then she went through some TA, and she also talked about how do you think they could have done better? So it really shows illustrative examples. So if you look for it, it might be the Open Mind, Open Spaces conference, and you can contact their main contact on their webpage. I think I can try to find it for you to see if you can get access to the recording.
Awesome. Anybody else want to comment on that one before we move on? Okay, here's a question from Jacqueline. She wants to know, how do you bring schools on board with the process while not seeing those involved with parent engagement for the purpose of advocacy as potentially stirring up issues in the school? So I think she's asking about, how do you engage all families in schools where they're hesitant to engage the families that might be raising issues they don't really want to talk about? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Mariella.
Yeah, I can get us started. So I think to begin, I think one of the initial things, right, to think about is like, how do you situate families, schools, and communities in a partnership framework? And how do you get them to see that they're all working towards the same goal, which is to provide access to rigorous opportunities, right? Whether it's in the after school space, rigorous academics, supports for social emotional well-being, and that you're all working towards the same goal. And so I think when you set that sort of common ground, you lay the foundation for collaboration.
Thank you, Mariella. Anybody else want to comment on this one?
Yeah. And I'll just add, I mean, I think you're exactly right. I think we have to get them thinking that they're all working toward the same goal. And the way that we have started trying to do that is we have gone out and talked to families. We've randomly selected families from each school to talk to. We've gone through an interview process with them and then done the same thing at the school level. So we're able to come to a common goal because we're listening, giving the families a voice as well as those at the school. And then we're able to collect all of that data and then look at it together and figure out how we can make things better. And when I say we, I mean the school. You know, we help facilitate that conversation. You know, of course, as you can imagine, we hear all sorts of things from the families and even from the schools internally. But because of the random selection of families, I think it gives us a nice feel for what families are thinking in those communities.
Thank you. I would also say, Jacqueline, you should check out famengage.org and read the report Beyond Caring. We have a report there that's based on the research that the Frameworks Institute did for NAFSCE that says when you're having these conversations, particularly with educators, it's more successful if your communication is foregrounding the benefits of family engagement to the people that you're communicating with, particularly with educators, and also avoiding the cultural models that tend to pop up into people's minds. That report, Beyond Caring, will really help you understand those strategies. And there's a companion report called Mapping the Gaps that will help you identify some of those problem areas, the traps, cultural models that people tend to fall into. Okay, so here is a question from Christopher Brown. Christopher says, given the challenge that many schools face engaging fathers in school and their children's education, are any of the SFECs presenting or any other SFECs with staff attending this webinar doing anything specific to engage fathers, like specific messages, father-child activities, recruiting dads as leaders, etc.? Anybody want to take a stab at this one? Yeah, Tom.
Great question.
Yeah, that is a good question. And I would say that, you know, parts of that have to do with understanding and acknowledging, you know, what every family member in a child's life brings to the table and being prepared to engage people through that lens. And I would say something that our center has done really intentionally is in every recruitment cycle for our advisory council, all of us have advisory councils that are at least half families to guide our work, have been very intentional in bringing fathers into that council to have their voices heard. We've also engaged the Ohio Council, the Ohio Fatherhood Council, which is a governor's office initiative around fatherhood, to leverage their leadership and expertise on that council as well, because we view it as an issue of representation and that there probably is actually a lot of like that most fathers are probably engaged like in their children's lives and education, but because of the representation issue, there is kind of not the normal path works and places for people to meet and share ideas and things. So that is kind of something that we've been really intentional about, because we know that everyone has a role to play in a child's life, whether it's moms, dads, grandparents, neighbors, and so on. So that's one way that we've tried to address that very specifically.
That's awesome. I like that you're thinking of that in terms of representation. That's a great way to think about it. Yeah, Vito, did you want to comment on this?
I'd like to just add in terms of a resource for everyone. A colleague of NAFSCE's, Dr. Ken Braswell, leads the National Fatherhood Clearinghouse, and I believe it's fatherhood.org, but if you Google the National Fatherhood Clearinghouse, there are all kinds of resources, and also I believe he will connect you and can connect you to various fatherhood networks across the country, including in your state.
Yeah.
Fatherhood.gov. We included the link in the chat.
Excellent. Thank you.
Excellent. You guys are on it. Here's a question from Teria. This question is, I'm in early education, pre-K 3 and pre-K 4. Many of the seminars I attend only speak to the K-12 population. Will there be any specifically for early learning, or have a portion of that will touch on that demographic? So of the SFEC directors here today, do you want to speak to the work that you do related to early childhood?
So I wanted to plug in about an event that we have coming up in August. This is a collaboration with MSDE, and it's the Family Engagement Summit. It's all going to be virtual, but it'll intentionally have a focus on early childhood and what family engagement looks like at that stage.
Excellent.
I would also love to share that on our website in the drop-down menus for families and for schools on our Ohio statewide website. We've got a bucket of resources for early childhood for families and also for educators. And coming up here tomorrow, we're kicking off a series called Real Talk. They're webinars, just 30 minutes during the lunch hour for families with young kids. And they're going to cover topics like kindergarten readiness and sibling rivalry. And we might even get into potty training. So things that early childhood, both families and educators care a lot about.
Excellent. Here's a question specifically for you, Tom. Is there a good time to get resources live for Dayton? I'm not sure why Darlene is asking that, but
because Dayton's a great city and is doing great things for their kids, and we want to be a resource in any way possible. I would encourage you for something like a specific thing like that, because we are Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center. We take that very seriously, and we're down to consult with anyone, anytime in our great state, to contact Meredith or myself personally via our emails to start that discussion, and I'll drop those both in the chat again right now.
thank you. I think we have time for a couple more. Here's one Karen asked very early on. Are SFECs similar to CCR&Rs? Those are child care resource and referral agencies. I am not familiar with those. Does anybody know the difference between those and the SFECs? For Karen?
I know a little bit.
Thank you, Vito.
Just a little. So there are some similarities. SFEC certainly can connect you to various networks. They're connecting to communities across their state. So in terms of that networking support, I think there's similarity there. They're capacity building organizations statewide. Child care resource centers are also capacity building and training organizations. So I think there are some similarities there. I think that would be the two areas of alignment. Obviously, the difference is the child care resource centers are for a more narrow age group. But capacity building, training, and networking is some of those aligned key areas of commonality.
Awesome, thank you. And here's a similar, or I guess related question from Miriam that Lisa Marie is trying to answer right now. She wants to know, how do SFECs differ from or complement or support community family support centers? Do they collaborate? Are you guys?
Community parent resource centers, is that what we're referring to, the special education local community parent resource centers?
So Miriam said community family support centers, but that could be what she's referencing.
So there are two things here. If we're talking about community parent resource centers, they are kind of our idea early when I talked about local family engagement centers, that we hope down the road someday there will be both local community-based SFECs, if you will, LFECs, and SFECs. That is the special ed model that we love so much, where there is a PTIC, the Parent Training Information Center, that is statewide, and then a community parent resource center, which is in a local community. There are also, however, family support centers in communities. In fact, our Kentucky partner here is very involved. Actually, Kentucky is one of the models for a statewide network of family support centers. And there's actually a national network of family support centers called the National Family Support Network that you can actually reach out to, and then they can connect you to family support centers in your state.
Yeah, and NAFSCE has done a webinar with them. And so if you look back in our archives, you can actually watch a webinar about those family support centers, the Family Support Center Network, and learn more about what they do and how to contact them there. Any of the SFEC directors want to speak to your connection to other family engagement centers in your state? Other partnerships you might have? Meredith?
I was just going to mention that one of our professional networks is the Family and Community Engagement Network in Ohio, and we have a variety of partners that are a part of that network, meeting several times each year, including the Ohio Coalition for the Education of Children with Disabilities, and they are a family support organization in Ohio. And as well, the Ohio Center for Autism and Low Incidence is a part of that. So that's just two connections to other centers in Ohio. But yes, I think all of our centers probably try to have connections across our states with various partners. And we do that through our advisory councils, through our professional networks, and just through sort of these one-off small opportunities. People email us, reach out to us and say, hey, what do you have for this kind of issue we're having, or can you give us some advice on this? So I would say probably across the board, we all do a little bit of that with local partners.
Yeah, thank you so much. I am afraid we have run out of time today. I do want to thank everybody who participated today. All of you have really helped bring this report to life. And the SFEC directors in particular did a great job of contributing to it so that we are better able to articulate the types of work that you do and the reach that you have within your own states. Throughout the webinar today, there was a lot of interest in people that are in states that don't yet have SFECs. And I think that, you know, helping them understand how important this work is and how fantastic these resources are is an opportunity to motivate other people in the field to really help educate policymakers about how important this work is, so that our dear friends at the SFECs will continue to be able to do the work that they do, and hopefully we'll expand the network into every state one day. So I want to thank you. I will turn it over to Vito for any closing remarks.
Thank you, Sherry. I want to just thank all of the panelists who presented today. I want to thank all of the SFECs for their great work. For us, this is just the beginning. So, and we look forward to future opportunities to present reports and that really speak to impact down the road, and the an evaluation of perks, which I know are SFECs. I keep doing that, Sherry. That Sherry and Sally and Ann Henderson are involved with. One last thing before we close, I just want to share that we are advocating for. We are advocating to the U.S. Department of Education that there be an office for family and community engagement. You are going to be hearing more about it. We think it's essential that there be an infrastructure in place that supports all states and all communities across the silos of the Department of Ed. They are looking at it and considering it now, but I did want you all, before we close, I wanted you all to know about it, and at the right time, you'll be hearing from us with the recommendation. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe out there.